Many moons ago, I promised to review Violence Jack the manga, and then I reviewed the OVAs, and then I talked about a bunch of other stuff, and then I didn't review the manga. And some of you have been waiting quite some time. Well, I decided it's time I take a break from my A Boy and His Dog review, and my Simpsons Hit and Run Challenge streams, and finally get around to reviewing Violence Jack, the manga. Full disclosure, there's a couple of volumes in the middle I still haven't read, to be perfectly honest. But, you know what? I'm tired of putting it off. I've read the ending, I've read the beginning, I've read most of the middle, there's like a couple of volumes I haven't read. But fuck it. Here we are. Here comes a good, proper review. I mean, I'm gonna have to gloss over some of it anyway, because it's such a fucking long series, so I guess it doesn't matter if I don't mention everything that happens in the middle. But again, there will be spoilers in this video for both Violence Jack, and a little bit later, maybe a little bit for Devilman. So yeah, let's hop in. And yes, the expected rant about whether or not it's a sequel will, of course, be coming in the video. So before we get to Violence Jack itself, I want to tell you a little story about how I got into Violence Jack, because Violence Jack is how I got into Go Nagai. Technically, I already did a video on this called How I Got Into Go Nagai and Where You Should Start If New, but you know what? I'm gonna do it anyway. So, many years ago, I saw a video of top 10 most fucked up anime. I think it was the Anime Man, but the actual video that I saw no longer exists. And at the time, I was attending college. I watched that video, and at number 1 was Violence Jack. And so I got curious, so I watched it on YouTube at the time. If I'm not mistaken, there's actually several uploads of it still up on YouTube, so there you go. I'm not going to link them, because if I do, they'll probably just get taken down anyway eventually, so, you know. But it is out there, if you know where to look. Later on, of course, I bought a copy of it. That copy turned out to be a bootleg. And later on, I bought the Discotheque copy. As it went on, during my college classes, between classes, I would read the manga on my iPod Touch Generation 2. And I read as much of the manga as was available at the time, which at the time only went up to the El Dorado arc. And I myself really enjoyed it. I loved every second of reading it, and then eventually I got into Devilman because of Violence Jack. Obviously I would go on to like Devilman more than Violence Jack, but if it wasn't for Violence Jack, I wouldn't have read Devilman or watched Devilman or done anything with Devilman. Anyway, I'm not going to go into as much detail about, you know, how I got into the other Go Nagai stuff later on, because I already did a whole video about the subject, but there you go. Very fond memories between my college classes of just pulling out my iPod Touch and reading the manga. But, yeah, so what's Violence Jack all about then? Well, it's about a giant earthquake called the Kanto Hellquake that destroys the entire Kanto region of Japan, creating a post-apocalyptic wasteland. And in this wasteland, as you can imagine, there's all sorts of bandits and ne'er-do-wells and bad boys going around doing shit hurting the weak. Well, as you can also imagine, the primary character, Violence Jack, and I say primary character rather than main character for a reason, which I'll get to in a minute, is that hero who goes around and saves people. As you can imagine, there's always a savior of the people. Jack's a little bit different than, say, Kenshiro, because Jack will just straight up kill hostages if they have hostages. Like that little girl that gets taken, and the guy's like, ho-ho, we have a hostage, ho-ho, and then he fucking kills her, and he's like, ho-ho, now you don't, ho-ho. His moral code is very different than Kenshiro's. Jack's ideals are not defend the weak, it's strengthen the weak so that they can fight their own battles. Because he doesn't believe in just, you know, saving them. He believes in strengthening them so that they can defend themselves after he leaves. The story continues to get crazier and crazier with each volume. Initially, when I first saw the OVAs, I said the OVAs were more fucked up than the manga. I no longer stand by that. Having actually read the Evil Town chapters in the manga, I don't think that the anime comes anywhere close. But yeah, so continuing to read the manga got increasingly difficult, because obviously only a little bit was translated at the time. Eventually, I did actually buy the entire manga series in Japanese, and I own it. And that's how I started reading it with Google Translate, with mixed results. Sometimes I'd get fairly accurate translations, other times I'd get some gibberish like, your mosquito possessed by the devil has taken over the world. So, it got increasingly frustrating to use Google Translate when reading it. For some volumes, straight up, I didn't even read it. I just looked at the pictures and figured out what was going on through context. Other ones I did try to translate very extensively, and again, I had mixed results on both. Later on, the final chapter, as well as a few chapters leading up to it, did get translated, so I read those proper with the fan sub before going back and continuing where I left off. So, here's where we're going to start getting into spoiler territory, but it's also where things start to tailspin and become fucking insane. One of the things I already knew about Violence Jack is that it's a sequel to Devilman, and I'll get into the semantics of that in a minute, because some of you are already probably raising red flags saying, but it's not a sequel, but it's... Yes, it is. I'll get to that in a minute. That's where I started watching Devilman itself, right? Because I'm like, oh, Violence Jack is a sequel, and at the time I had only seen the OVAs and read what manga was available. And I didn't know at the time that, and I didn't know at the time which versions of Devilman were which, and all this stuff about all the sequels and everything. I didn't know how massive of a franchise it was at the time. But not only is it a sequel to Devilman, but it contains characters from, like, every prominent Go Nagai work ever written. You got the Abashiri family appearing as Kraken's gang later on. You got the main cast from Doraron Enmakun showing up. You got Cutie Honey as 2 different characters, one of which is Ryo's sister in this continuity. Perhaps the craziest of all is you have Jim Mazinger, who is the incarnation of Mazinger Z, the robot, being reincarnated as a human, and Koji rides around on his head to control him. But not only that, the universe merges with the Susanoo O universe, Go Nagai's Susanoo. They merge together in the Hyper Grappler arc, so you got King Dread, and you have a bunch of other characters from Susanoo as well. It just gets nuttier and nuttier as it goes on. It just starts bringing in all of his other fucking characters, and starts going off the damn wall. It's crazy, and I love it. I love every second of it. It gets really great. It introduced several characters who would later become Go Nagai staples, such as Iron Kaiser and Riki, both of which would be used in Shuten Doji, as well as a few other things. It also had Dante in it as the leader of a motorcycle gang. I mean, it had a lot of shit in it, and it's nutty. On to the ending, right? So here's where we get to the ending, and spoilers. In the ending, it's revealed that the world of Violence Jack is a reincarnation of the world from Devilman. After Devilman's death, subsequently everybody's death when God wiped out everybody on the planet, including Ryo, the world was reincarnated, where Ryo himself was made into a slave of the Slum King as a dog person, meaning he had his arms and legs and tongue cut off, and he was just kind of a pet. Kind of like that girl from Mai-chan's Daily Life and from the Mai-chan's Home Cooking chapter. Ryo himself didn't have any memory of being Satan, but he did eventually regain that memory and become Satan again. Slum King became Xenon again. Oh yeah, Miki was also a dog person, and then she fucking died again. But after Ryo becomes Satan once more, Violence Jack fuses back together with his 2 other forms, which I neglected to mention before, so I'll mention them now. Jack had a female form and a male form, which are the same person but also separate entities. So he has the female form, the male form, and the kid form. The 3 of them fuse together to become Akira Fudo and Devilman. Once he transforms into Devilman, he fights Satan again, but this time he wins, to go on continuing wandering the wastelands, presumably for eternity. And that's what leads us to the fact that it is in fact a Devilman sequel. Let's get with that. Part of the argument why people have tried to claim that it isn't a Devilman sequel is because of a claim on the Devilman Wiki. And the Devilman Wiki has this statement, quote, "It has been stated by Nagai when he was at a convention that Violence Jack was not canon to anything other than itself. This was several years before the sequels. Later on, a definitive sequel, Devilman Lady, was released. It is also claimed that he stated that he was not a fan of the Violence Jack OVA series. There are no sources listed for either of these things that are stated. I can't prove that. I'm not disputing that he may have said that, but just because he says it is not canon to Devilman does not make it not a sequel." And a lot of people have twisted that quote and added to it. They say that they are not canon to each other. False. Devilman is canon to Violence Jack, even if Violence Jack is not canon to Devilman. Because here's a little lesson on what canon means. Strap in, boils and ghouls, but canon is meaning that something actually happened within a fictional universe. Events are supposed to have happened within the context of that universe. So, for instance, let's take Dragon Ball GT. Dragon Ball GT is no longer considered canon by Akira Toriyama and many people officially involved in Dragon Ball. So officially, Dragon Ball GT is no longer canon, meaning it does not happen in the currently accepted timeline of Dragon Ball. That said, the events of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z still took place within the Dragon Ball GT timeline. Even though GT is not canon to Original and Z, the events of Original and Z still happened in the GT timeline, therefore, the original 2 series are still canon to GT, even if GT is not canon to them. You get what where I'm going with this? Go Nagai did write sequels that are definitive canon conclusive sequels, Devilman Lady and Devilman Saga. Devilman Lady has a terrible ending, that's a whole other thing. I love most of it, hate the ending. Devilman Saga, I've read up to chapter 43, which is much as I could find on the app. With that said, Devilman Lady and Devilman Saga are the currently accepted canon official timeline by Go Nagai himself, meaning those are canon to the Devilman continuity. However, the events in Devilman still happened in the Violence Jack timeline and even the Shin Violence Jack timeline. So despite the fact that neither version of Violence Jack is canon to Devilman, the events of Devilman are still canon to Violence Jack. They still happened. Otherwise, the connection wouldn't exist. That is how it works. A lot of people try and say that Violence Jack is a loose connection to Devilman. I would say, in the spirit of how long the series is, sure. But I would say in content, absolutely not. Simply due to the fact that the main character is the main character from the previous work, in a reincarnation similarly to the canon sequels, albeit with a different way it ends. You see, the way I've always looked at fiction is despite what the canon official version may or may not be, I'm going to accept whichever version I find to be better. Because art is subjective and it doesn't really matter what you consider happened or didn't happen in a fictional universe. So, depending on how Devilman Saga ends, will determine whether or not I acknowledge that as my preferred ending. Because I'm not gonna lie, I quite like the ending to Violence Jack, and I like it a hell of a lot better than the ending to Devilman Lady. So, despite the fact that Violence Jack is not canon, it is in fact a sequel. It is an indirect sequel that takes a while to connect itself. I will give you that. But it is a sequel, and the events of Devilman still occurred, meaning those events are canon to Violence Jack, even if Violence Jack is not canon to the currently accepted Devilman timeline. Anyway, rant over. Let's get on to my analysis of Violence Jack itself. Violence Jack is a great story. I absolutely love it. It was Fist of the North Star before Fist of the North Star. It was Mad Max before Mad Max. It was one of the OG apocalyptic series. It predates Mad Max by several years, and it predates Fist of the North Star by a decade. The story itself gets really graphic and has a lot of cool fight scenes in it. In addition to that, I would say that Violence Jack has my favorite art style out of any manga ever written. It's not my favorite manga ever written, but it has my favorite manga art style. I really like the art in Violence Jack. I think it's Go Nagai's best work, and I don't think he's ever topped it. That said, it's not perfect. There are definitely some negatives. One of my biggest criticisms of Violence Jack is Jack himself often shows up halfway through an arc to resolve the problem, while not being prominent in most of the arc up until that point. This does become less of an issue later on, because Jack definitely takes more of a focus in the later arcs, but earlier on, Jack himself is very mysterious, which is great, but you don't see a whole lot of him. He doesn't have a lot of quote-unquote screen time, and I know it's not a screen, but for lack of a better term, that's the term I'm using. Another criticism is, although I love how zany and weird it gets with all of the other Go Nagai crossovers, sometimes it gets a little bit too weird, in my opinion. For instance, there's a chapter where the Slum King straight up kills Jack, and then he's fine in the next chapter, and it's not really explained. Not to mention there are several different chapters where Jack is shown killing the Slum King, only to have the Slum King be fine later. And maybe that has something to do with them being demons, maybe they heal up, but it's kind of confusing. And it can get a little bit hard to follow. The arcs themselves are fairly episodic and can be read in almost any order, with a few notable exceptions, obviously. But I do think that overwhelmingly, despite some of the weirder elements, I think that it is a great story. It has a huge cast of characters, so I didn't mention everyone. I didn't mention Mondo and Tatsuya. You know, those are two very prominent characters in the story, and in fact, at one point, Mondo gets killed, and then there's like a ghost Mondo who's like a figment of Tatsuya's imagination, and it's a whole big thing too. But there's just a lot of shit that happens in Violence Jack, so it's really hard to name it all in a video without going on for really long periods of time. I will, however, give you what my top 5 favorite arcs are. Not necessarily in order, and not going to be a countdown, it's going to be a count up. But my favorite arc, personally, is probably the Slums of Kanto arc. I really like that one. I would say second would probably be the El Dorado arc, then probably the Evil Town arc, probably followed by Hell's Wind, and then the ending. The ending's a really good arc, too. I would say that I also really like the Hyper Grappler arc, because it's in a fucking wrestling ring with the characters from Susanoo and shit like that, and it gets really crazy. I also really like the Jim Mazinger arc, because it has a bunch of the Mazinger mechs reincarnated, as well as Baron Ashura. I would say with Violence Jack, the manga is considerably better than the OVA trilogy, though I do really like the OVA trilogy. And I am definitely of the opinion that I think someone like Seven Seas needs to get a hold of this and give it an omnibus treatment. Originally, in the Japanese, there were 31 volumes of Violence Jack. However, upon later releases, there are 18, because they combine them. So there's 18 of them, comprising the quote-unquote complete edition, which is the version I purchased. But it does still contain the entire series. There's also a couple of spin-offs, such as Shin Violence Jack, which I've already reviewed, and Violence Jack Demons in a War-Torn Land, which I can never actually find because every single app I go on that has it is really just the first 3 chapters of Shin Violence Jack, which is not what that is. The actual Violence Jack Demons in a War-Torn Land is like samurai shit, and I really want to find it, but I can't. It's just not out there anywhere. But yeah, I highly recommend reading Violence Jack. It is a very graphic manga, lots of gore and nudity, so do be prepared for that. But yeah, it is a great series, and I highly recommend it. It is one of my all-time favorites, and it is Go Nagai, and it's what got me into Go Nagai. That said, if you like Go Nagai, you'll probably like Violence Jack, especially the manga. But anyway, that's really all I have to say in this video, I think. This has been Fugitive Red Eye, and have a great rest of the day. Toodles.
God damn it! Where the hell is Jack? Fucking chicken shit! Fucking shit! Fucking shit! Holy shit, the bastard's here! I'm gonna fucking die here, Jack!